She said I was part of the family. Her little brother called me Kuya when I paid his tuition. But I heard him laugh one night. Uncle Foreigner's our lucky charm. I thought they loved me. Turns out I was just their scholarship plan. The rice was still warm when Lyra placed the plate in front of me. Steam rose from the chicken adobo, mixing garlic and soy sauce in a way that made my mouth water. Her mother smiled from across the small wooden table, her weathered hands folded in prayer position. "Salamat, Lord," she whispered in Tagalog, then switched to English for my benefit. "Thank you for bringing Kelvin to our family." Jomar, her 19-year-old brother, was already reaching for the vegetables, but he paused to grin at me with those bright, intelligent eyes that reminded me so much of my nephew back in Naura. "Kuya Kelvin," he said, his accent thick, but his English improving every month. "You're going to love this. 8 lira cooked it just for you." She spent 3 hours in the kitchen. I felt something warm spread through my chest, that familiar feeling of being wanted, needed, appreciated. Kuya, big brother. After 3 months of visiting this modest concrete home in Tuguegarao City, hearing that word still made me feel like I belonged somewhere again. "It smells incredible," I said, inhaling deeply. The aroma reminded me of the Filipino restaurant Margaret and I used to visit in Sydney, back when she was still healthy enough to travel. "You're spoiling me." Lyra's hand found my shoulder from behind, her touch gentle and familiar, her fingers warm through my cotton shirt. "I told you my family would love you," she whispered near my ear, her breath tickling my neck. "They don't just love you, Kelvin. They respect you. They see how good you are to us." I believed every word. How could I not? The evidence was everywhere. The way her mother insisted on washing my clothes by hand, the way Jomar saved his best school stories to share with me, the way neighbors stopped by just to meet the kind Australian who was helping the Reyes family. "You make everything better," Lyra continued, moving to sit beside me. "Before you came, we were just surviving. Now we're really living." After dinner, after we'd laughed over Jomar's impression of his strict mathematics professor, after her mother had shown me new photos of her grandchildren in Manila, I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. It was thick, heavier than usual, and Jomar's eyes immediately lit up when he saw it. He knew what it meant. "Your tuition for next semester," I said, sliding it across the scratched wooden table. "Plus, a little extra for books and supplies." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, and I watched his face transform from hope to amazement. 28,000 pesos. More than I'd ever given at once, but his grades had improved so dramatically that I wanted to reward his hard work. "Kuya," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. This is too much. I can't accept this." But even as he protested, I could see the relief in his eyes. No more worrying about deadlines. No more choosing between textbooks and meals. "You can and you will," I told him firmly. "Education is the best investment anyone can make." Jomar stood up suddenly, nearly knocking over his chair, and hugged me with the fierce gratitude of a young man who understood exactly what this money meant for his future. "I promise I won't let you down," he said into my shoulder, his voice muffled but sincere. "I'll make you proud, Kuya. I'll become the engineer you believe I can be." His emotion was contagious, and I felt my own eyes getting wet. When was the last time someone had hugged me like that? When was the last time I'd felt so important to someone's dreams? "You're already making me proud," I told him, patting his back the way I imagined a real big brother would. "Every test you pass, every project you complete, you're proving that investing in good people pays the best dividends." Lyra kissed my cheek then, her lips soft and warm against my skin. "See?" she said, her voice full of affection and something that sounded like genuine love. "We're a real family now. You're not just my boyfriend anymore, Kelvin. You're our Kuya, our provider, our guardian angel." My heart felt so full I thought it might burst. This was everything I dreamed of during those long, silent months after selling my small house in Naura. After losing Margaret to the cancer that took her piece by piece over 2 horrible years. After all those lonely nights sitting in front of the television, wondering if I'd ever matter to anyone again, if I'd ever be more than just another pension recipient waiting to die. Here in this simple home, surrounded by people who needed me and appreciated me and called me family, I felt alive again. I felt like the man I used to be before grief hollowed me out. "Thank you," I said to all of them, my voice rough with emotion. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Lyra squeezed my hand under the table. Thank you for choosing us, she said back. Thank you for seeing our potential when nobody else would. But before there was this family, this sense of belonging and purpose, there was just her. Just Lyra, a profile picture on a Facebook group called Expats in the Philippines, responding to my desperate posts with kindness when everyone else offered generic advice or tried to sell me something. I was 63 then, recently retired from 38 years working for Australian Rail, and drowning in the oppressive silence of an empty house that still smelled like Margaret's lavender lotion and echoed with memories of her laughter. I joined the group on a whim, posting questions that probably made me sound pathetic. Where should a widower start over? What cities are safe for old foreigners? How much money do you need to live comfortably in the Philippines? Most responses were either condescending or commercial, people trying to sell me real estate or insurance or tours. But Lyra's comment stood out like a warm light in the darkness. You look like a gentle man in your photos, she'd written. The Philippines has many beautiful places for gentlemen who want to start fresh. I live in Tuguegarao City. It's quiet here. Not like Manila or Cebu. Simple people, simple life. Maybe you would like it. Something about the way she said gentle, the way she seemed to see something in my face that even I had forgotten was there, made me click on her profile immediately. She was 28, young enough to be my daughter, but there was something mature in her eyes, something knowing and kind. Her photos showed a woman who worked at a beauty salon, who went to church every Sunday, who helped take care of her younger brother and aging mother. She wasn't flashy or provocative like some of the other women who'd messaged me. She seemed real, authentic, safe. We started messaging privately. Simple conversations at first. She asked about Australia, about my work, about what brought me to the Philippines. I told her about Margaret, about the loneliness, about feeling like my life had ended when hers did. Grief is love with nowhere to go, she replied one evening, but maybe love can find new places to grow. Her English wasn't perfect, but her compassion was fluent. We moved to video calls after a few weeks. Seeing her face, hearing her voice, watching the way she listened with her whole attention made something frozen inside me begin to thaw. She never asked for money during those early conversations, never pushed for anything except connection. She just listened when I talked about Margaret, about the guilt of moving on, about the fear that I was too old and damaged to build something new. I think you would like it here, she said during one of our late-night calls, when the time difference meant I was eating breakfast while she was getting ready for bed. My family is simple, but we have big hearts. We don't have much money, but we have love to spare. The way she said it, without artifice or manipulation, made me want to see this place through her eyes. Would you like to meet them sometime? She asked carefully. If you ever visit the Philippines again? The vulnerability in her voice, the way she seemed genuinely nervous about my answer, convinced me she was different from the others. When I visited the Philippines for the second time, specifically to meet her, she was waiting at the Tuguegarao airport in a yellow sundress, holding a small sign with my name written in careful cursive. She was even more beautiful in person, but also more nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her dress as I approached. Are you ready to meet everyone? She asked, taking my hand as we walked to her family's jeepney. Her palm was slightly damp with perspiration, and I realized she was as scared as I was. What if they didn't like me? What if I was too old, too foreign, too awkward? What if this was all a terrible mistake? They'll love you because I love you, she said, and those words hit me like a physical force. Love. She loved me. When had someone last said those words to me? I love you too, I replied, and meant it completely. The drive to her house took 20 minutes through narrow streets lined with small shops and concrete homes painted in bright colors. Children waved at the jeepney, and Lyra waved back, calling out greetings in rapid Tagalog. They're curious about you, she translated. Word spreads fast in small cities. Everyone knows Lyra is bringing home her Australian boyfriend. Her house was smaller than I'd expected, but immaculately clean. Her mother, a woman in her 50s with Lyra's kind eyes and a shy smile, had spent hours preparing food. The table groaned under the weight of dishes I couldn't name but were eager to try. Jomar, then 18 and just starting university, practiced his English with careful precision, asking me about Australia, about my work, about whether I thought he could succeed as an engineer. With your determination and intelligence, I told him, You can succeed at anything." He beamed at the compliment, and I could see how much my approval meant to him. Neighbors stopped by throughout the evening, curious to meet the foreigner who'd captured Lyra's heart. They spoke in a mixture of English and Tagalog, but their warmth needed no translation. That night, lying next to Lyra on her narrow bed while her family slept in the next room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Margaret got sick. Peace, belonging, hope for the future. "Are you happy?" Lyra whispered in the darkness. "Yes," I said, and realized I meant it completely. "I feel like I'm home." She curled closer to me, her head on my chest. "You are home," she said. "This is where you belong now." I believed her. How could I not? Everything felt so right, so natural, so much like the family I'd always wanted but never quite achieved. Margaret and I had tried for children but couldn't conceive. We'd talked about adoption but never followed through. Now, at 63, I was finally getting the chance to be a father figure, a provider, a man who mattered to people who needed him. Over the following months, as our relationship deepened and I began spending more time in Tuguegarao, the requests started small and reasonable. "Jomar's tuition is due next week," Lyra mentioned casually one evening as we walked around the town plaza, watching families enjoy the cool air after a hot day. "I wish I could help him more, but my salary at the salon barely covers our food." She wasn't asking directly, but the implication was clear. I transferred the money without hesitation. 15,000 pesos. Less than 400 Australian dollars. A small price to invest in a young man's future, especially when that young man was calling me Kuya and looking at me like I was the answer to his prayers. "You don't have to do this," Lyra said when I told her about the transfer, but her relief was obvious. "You're not obligated to take care of us." But that's exactly what I wanted to do, take care of them, be needed, be the hero of their story. Then, it was the roof. "The leak is getting worse," her mother explained during my next visit, pointing to a dark stain on the ceiling above Jomar's study area. "Every time it rains, water drips on his textbooks and computer. I'm worried his schoolwork will be ruined." The repair estimate was 12,000 pesos. I paid it immediately. Then it was medicine for her mother's diabetes. The monthly cost was substantial for a family living on Lyra's modest salon income, but negligible for someone with my Australian pension. Then a new washing machine, because the old one had finally died after 15 years of faithful service. Each expense made perfect sense individually. Each one solved a real problem for people I was beginning to love. Each time Lyra would hug me and say the same thing. "It's not about money, Kelvin. You're part of us." Family helps family. She always insisted on GCash transfers instead of bank deposits or cash. "It's faster this way," she explained when I offered alternatives. "More convenient. Less paperwork." When I occasionally asked for receipts, wanting to keep track of how much I was contributing, she'd look genuinely hurt. "We don't want you to feel like an ATM," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "We want you to feel like family. Family doesn't ask for receipts when they help each other." So I stopped asking. I didn't want to seem petty or untrusting. I didn't want to reduce our relationship to a series of financial transactions. I wanted to believe that love could exist without accounting, that generosity didn't need documentation, that family meant never having to prove your worth with paperwork. Every visit became a celebration. They'd prepare massive meals that took all day to cook, organize karaoke nights where even shy neighbors would come to sing, take endless family photos with me positioned proudly in the center. Jomar would show me his grades, always improving, often with handwritten notes from professors praising his dedication. "Because of you, Kuya," he'd say, his gratitude seemingly genuine and deep. "You're changing my whole future. My children will have better lives because of what you're giving me now." Lyra would curl up next to me during movies, whispering observations and translations, making me feel included in ways that went beyond language. "You make everything possible for us," she'd say during quiet moments. "Before you came, we were just surviving day to day. Now we can plan for tomorrow. Now we can dream." I felt useful in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Needed, important, essential to their happiness and progress. For the first time since Margaret died, I had a purpose beyond just existing, just filling the empty hours between waking and sleeping. I was building something real and lasting, creating a legacy that would outlive me, becoming someone's hero, someone's salvation, someone's answer to prayer. The money I was spending felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Better than the stock portfolio that was just growing numbers on a screen. Better than the term deposits that earned interest but created no joy. This money was creating smiles, enabling dreams, building futures. It was love made tangible, hope converted to currency, family bonds strengthened with every transfer. But there was a weight growing in my chest, a small voice that asked uncomfortable questions during quiet moments. Why did every family gathering somehow end with mention of a new financial need? Why did Lyra's affection seem brightest right before casually mentioning money? Why did Jomar's gratitude always come paired with updates about upcoming expenses? I pushed those thoughts away aggressively. Love wasn't supposed to be calculated or analyzed or reduced to patterns and statistics. Trust meant not keeping score, not looking for hidden motives, not questioning the sincerity of people who'd opened their hearts and home to me. Suspicious thinking was the enemy of genuine connection. Paranoia was the price of a lonely life. But the questions kept coming back. During long flights between Sydney and Tuguegarao, I'd find myself making mental lists of everything I'd paid for. Tuition, medical bills, home repairs, groceries, utilities, new appliances, emergency funds for unexpected crises. The total was climbing towards 6 figures in Australian dollars, but that wasn't what bothered me. I could afford it. What bothered me was the timing. The way requests always came just when I was feeling most secure in their affection. The way problems always emerged just when I was most invested in being their solution. But every time I started to feel suspicious, Lyra would do something that dissolved my doubts. She'd surprise me with my favorite meal, or tell me how proud she was to be my girlfriend, or share some intimate detail about her dreams for our future together. The kitchen was dark when I walked in that night. I couldn't sleep, my body clock still confused after the long flight from Sydney. Jet lag always hit me harder now that I was older, leaving me wide awake at 3 a.m. with a mind that raced between thoughts and worries. I just wanted water, maybe some of the leftover rice from dinner. But as I approached the refrigerator, I heard Jomar's voice coming from his room, speaking in a mixture of Tagalog and English. He was on a video call, probably with friends from university. The walls in the house were thin, and voices carried easily between rooms. I was about to turn around and give him privacy when I heard my name mentioned. Not Kuya Kelvin, just Kelvin. Then laughter. Male voices, young and careless. No need to worry about tuition next semester, sis. Jomar was saying in English now, probably showing off his language skills to friends. Uncle Foreigner's got us covered. More laughter, the kind of sound young men make when they think they're clever. He's like our personal scholarship program. Just watch this. There was a pause, and then Jomar's voice changed, becoming the respectful, grateful tone I knew so well. Salamat, Kuya Kelvin, you're so kind to our family. I promise to make you proud. Then his normal voice returned. See, 8 lira just has to smile and mention some expense, and he opens his wallet. Works every time. The way he said Uncle Foreigner wasn't grateful or loving or even neutral. It was mocking, contemptuous, like I was a joke they all shared, a walking ATM with feelings and a passport. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure everyone in the house could hear it. This was the boy who called me Kuya to my face, who hugged me after every tuition payment, who promised to make me proud, to honor the investment I was making in his future, who showed me his grades and talked about naming his future children after me. The boy I'd begun to think of as the son I never had was laughing about me with his friends, reducing our relationship to a scam, a con, a way to extract money from a lonely old foreigner who was too desperate for family to notice he was being used. The respect I thought I'd earned was performance. The gratitude I thought was genuine was theater. The love I thought was real was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep the money flowing. I didn't confront anyone that night. I walked back to the bedroom on unsteady legs and lay down next to Lyra, who was sleeping peacefully, her face serene in the moonlight streaming through the thin curtains. She looked beautiful and innocent, nothing like a woman capable of orchestrating such an elaborate deception. But the seed of doubt was planted now, growing fast and sending roots deep into every memory, every conversation, every moment of affection I'd treasured. Had any of it been real? When she said she loved me, did she mean it? Or was she just maintaining the performance? When she talked about our future together, was she genuinely excited, or just ensuring my continued investment? When she introduced me to neighbors as her boyfriend, was she proud, or was she simply establishing my role as the family's financial benefactor? I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I'd misunderstood, that teenage boys always joke about things they don't fully appreciate, that Jomar's casual cruelty didn't reflect the family's true feelings. Maybe he was just showing off to friends. Maybe he was trying to seem cool and sophisticated by pretending he didn't care about my generosity. Maybe the gratitude he showed me in person was real, and the mockery I'd overheard was just the kind of thoughtless bragging young men do when they think no one important is listening. But even as I tried to rationalize what I'd heard, I knew something fundamental had changed. The doubt was there now, and it was growing. The next morning at breakfast, I asked carefully, trying to seem casual while watching everyone's reactions. "Does Jomar respect me?" Lyra looked confused, almost hurt by the question. "Of course he does. Why would you ask that?" Her mother nodded vigorously, not understanding the English but sensing the tone. "He talks about you all the time," Lyra continued. "About how grateful he is, how you're changing his life." I shrugged, trying to project the mild curiosity of a man seeking reassurance, rather than the desperate need for truth of someone whose world was cracking. "Sometimes, I wonder if he sees me as family, or just as a sponsor." The word sponsor hung in the air like an accusation. Lyra set down her coffee cup and moved to my side of the table, her movements quick and concerned. "Kelvin, look at me," she said, taking my hands in hers. Her eyes were wide and sincere, filled with what looked like genuine confusion and hurt. "Why are you thinking like this? Has someone said something to you?" I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, for micro-expressions that might reveal guilty knowledge. "He's just immature sometimes," she continued. "All teenagers are. You know how boys that age can be. They don't always express their feelings properly." She squeezed my hands tighter. "But he's so grateful for everything you do. We all are. You've given him opportunities he never could have had without you." She paused, her voice becoming softer, more vulnerable. "Are you having doubts about us? About this relationship? Because if you are, we need to talk about it honestly." Her apparent sincerity was almost enough to convince me I was being paranoid. "Almost. You're not a sponsor," she said firmly, standing up to hug me tightly. "You're my partner. You're part of this family forever. What you do for us comes from love, and what we feel for you is love too. Real love. The kind that lasts." I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. I wanted desperately to believe her. I wanted to go back to the simple faith I'd had just 24 hours earlier, when their love felt unquestionable and my place in their family seemed secure. "I know this is hard," she whispered against my neck. "Being so far from your own country, depending on us to translate everything, never being completely sure you understand what's happening around you. But you have to trust that what we have is real." But things started changing after that night. Subtle things that might have seemed insignificant to someone who wasn't already questioning everything. Lyra became more protective of her phone, always placing it face down during meals, taking it with her to the bathroom, sleeping with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand where I might accidentally see notifications. She started having long conversations in the evenings, speaking in hushed Tagalog while pacing around the small living room or stepping outside to the back porch. "Just talking to my cousin in Manila," she'd explain when I looked curious. "Girl stuff. Family drama you wouldn't be interested in. She said she was planning something special for my upcoming birthday. It's a surprise, so don't be nosy," she teased, but there was something different in her voice. Less playful, more guarded, something that sounded almost like warning. One evening I walked into the bedroom while she was texting and caught a glimpse of her screen before she quickly turned it away. The conversation wasn't with any female cousin. The name at the top was distinctly masculine, Nico. Male names in the Philippines weren't that different from male names anywhere else, and I'd been in the country long enough to recognize them. When she noticed me looking, she quickly closed the phone and smiled, but her hand was trembling slightly. "You scared me," she said, but her voice was tight with something that sounded like panic. I didn't hear you come in. There was a pause, the kind of silence that fills with unspoken accusations and denials. I asked, trying to sound casual but knowing I was failing. My voice carried the weight of growing suspicion, and she heard it immediately. Her smile faltered for just a second before reasserting itself. My cousin's boyfriend. I told you about him. But she'd never mentioned any Nico before. I was sure of it. I had a good memory for names and relationships, especially when it came to Lyra's family. She'd talked about her cousin in Manila many times, but never about a boyfriend. He's helping plan your birthday surprise, she added quickly, but the explanation felt forced, rehearsed. Don't you trust me? She asked, and there was something sharp in her voice now, something I'd never heard before. An edge that cut through the sweetness I was used to. I immediately felt guilty for questioning her, for letting my paranoia poison what should have been a loving relationship. Of course I trust you, I said, reaching for her hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. She softened then, moving closer to me on the bed, her body warm and familiar against my side. I know this is hard, she said, her voice returning to its usual gentle tone. Being so far from your home, depending on me to translate everything, never being completely sure what people are saying about you. But you have to trust that I love you, that we all love you, that what we have together is real and permanent. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear, perfectly calibrated to address my fears and insecurities. Too perfectly, perhaps. But I let myself be comforted anyway. I let her convince me that my suspicions were unfounded, that my doubts were the product of cultural confusion and emotional insecurity rather than genuine cause for concern. Later that night, after we'd made love and I was drifting toward sleep, I heard her get up to use the bathroom. Nothing unusual about that, but then I heard soft giggling coming through the thin door. Intimate sounds. The kind of laughter you share with someone special, someone who makes you happy in ways that go beyond family affection or grateful friendship. When she came back to bed 10 minutes later, I pretended to be asleep, but my mind was racing. Who was she talking to at midnight? Why was she hiding in the bathroom to have conversations? What could possibly be so funny at that hour, and why did her laughter sound so different from the way she laughed with me? The questions multiplied in the darkness, but I had no answers. Only growing certainty that something was very wrong. I wanted to surprise Jomar. He'd been working so hard at university, and his grades had improved dramatically since I'd started paying his tuition. His professors were praising his dedication, and he'd even been selected for a special engineering project that could lead to internship opportunities. I felt proud of him, proud of what my investment was making possible. So I bought him a new tablet, something high-end that would help with his engineering studies and research. I decided to meet him at the university gates after his afternoon classes, something I'd never done before. I'd never inserted myself into his school life, never tried to claim public credit for supporting his education, but I wanted to see his world, to understand the future I was helping build, to feel like a real part of his academic journey. I was waiting by the main entrance, holding the wrapped tablet and feeling excited about his reaction when a young man approached me. He was about Jomar's age, wearing the same engineering department shirt, carrying the heavy backpack that marked him as a serious student. "Excuse me," he said in careful English, clearly practiced but not completely natural. "Are you Kuya Jomar's Australian uncle?" The way he said it made my stomach clench immediately. Not Australian friend, not family member, not Lyra's boyfriend. Uncle. And not even Filipino uncle, which might have been a term of respect. Australian uncle. A designation that emphasized my foreignness, my otherness, my role as someone fundamentally separate from their real family structure. "I'm Kelvin," I said carefully, not confirming or denying the relationship he'd described. He grinned widely, a smile that seemed friendly but carried undertones I couldn't quite identify. "Oh, cool, man. I'm Paolo, Jomar's classmate in structural engineering. He talks about you all the time." This should have made me happy. It should have confirmed that Jomar valued our relationship enough to mention me to his peers. But something in Paolo's expression felt wrong. There was an awareness there, a knowing quality that suggested Jomar's mentions of me weren't entirely positive or respectful. "You're the one who pays for everything, right?" Paolo continued, completely oblivious to how his words were landing on my ears. "Lucky Jomar. Free tuition, Free books, free everything. He says you fund his whole family. He laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, like he was sharing a joke that everyone understood except me. I wish I had an Australian uncle who just sends money whenever I need it. Some guys have all the luck. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly squeezing my ribcage. The tablet in my bag suddenly felt heavy, ridiculous, the gesture of a fool who'd misunderstood his place in someone else's life. Does Jomar really talk about me that way? I asked, my voice barely steady. Paolo nodded enthusiastically, apparently missing the pain in my tone. Oh yes, all the time, he calls you Uncle Foreigner. He says you're like having a rich relative who doesn't know when to stop giving. The boy laughed again, then seemed to notice my expression changing. Oh, but in a good way, he added quickly, probably sensing he'd said something wrong but not understanding what. He's grateful, I think. We all wish we had someone like that. Uncle Foreigner. Not Kuya. Not family. Not even Kelvin. Just a walking wallet with an Australian passport and a desperate need to belong somewhere. I walked away without saying goodbye to Paolo, without giving Jomar his gift, without any explanation. I just turned and walked back to my rental car, my legs moving automatically while my mind reeled with the implications of what I'd heard. Everything I'd believed about my relationship with this family was wrong. The respect I thought I'd earned was performance. The gratitude I thought was genuine was theater. The love I thought was growing was a carefully maintained illusion designed to keep me invested, both emotionally and financially. I drove back to the house in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my mind racing through months of interactions and conversations, looking for signs I'd missed, clues I'd ignored, moments when the mask had slipped and I'd been too blind to notice. When I arrived, Lyra wasn't there. Her mother said she'd gone to the market, but something felt off about the explanation. Lyra usually told me when she was leaving, usually asked if I needed anything, usually invited me to come along, and she never went to the market in the afternoon. She preferred the early morning when the produce was fresh and the crowds were smaller. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger. She never left her phone behind. Never. In all the months I'd known her, she'd been attached to that device like it was a vital organ. I stared at it for 5 minutes, my conscience battling with my suspicion, my love for her fighting against my need to know the truth. Then I picked it up. I knew her passcode. She'd given it to me months ago as proof of her transparency, evidence that she had nothing to hide from me. See? She'd said, I trust you completely. No secrets between us. Now I was about to violate that trust, but I had to know. I had to understand what was real and what was performance. The phone unlocked easily. I went straight to her messages, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid I might pass out. The conversation with Nico was right at the top of her chat list. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one hitting me like a physical blow. He'll send the money next week. Lyra had written just 2 days ago. 30,000 this time. Just act sweet and mention Jomar's upcoming expenses. Nico's reply made my blood freeze. You're getting good at this. How much total now? Almost 200,000 pesos since he started visiting. Maybe more if I play the birthday surprise right. They were laughing about me, planning how to extract more money, discussing my emotions like they were levers to be pulled for maximum financial benefit. There were other messages, older ones going back months. Nico calling me your old man, and the ATM. Lyra sharing photos of gifts I'd given her, mocking my sentimentality. He actually cried when I said I loved him, she'd written. Too easy. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered on the tile floor. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out everything that mattered to me. Everything was fake. Every I love you, every family dinner, every time Jomar called me Kuya, every grateful hug, every moment of affection I'd treasured and replayed in my mind during lonely nights in Sydney. It was all performance. Elaborate theater designed to keep the money flowing from a lonely old foreigner who was so desperate to belong that he'd pay any price for the illusion of love. I wasn't a family member. I wasn't even a real boyfriend. I was a mark, a target, a walking bank account with feelings and a fatal need to be needed. When Lyra came home an hour later, I was sitting exactly where she'd left me, staring at nothing. My world collapsed into rubble around me. Why do you look so sad? She asked, moving toward me with concern. her acting skills as perfect as always. But I couldn't look at her. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't participate in this charade for another minute. I saw your messages, I said quietly, not looking up from the table. I know about Nico. I know what this really is. Her face went completely white. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not love, not affection, not even guilt, just calculation. She was already figuring out how to minimize the damage, how to salvage what she could from a situation that had suddenly gone very wrong. I didn't yell at her. I didn't rage or demand explanations or give her the chance to lie her way out of what I'd discovered. I was too empty for anger, too hollowed out for confrontation. That night, I sat in the small internet cafe near the market and wrote her a long message on Viber. My fingers moved slowly across the keyboard, choosing each word carefully, trying to express the enormity of what I was feeling without descending into bitterness or cruelty. I loved you, I began, the words appearing on the screen like a confession to a crime I didn't know I'd committed. I wanted to believe we were building something real together. I wanted to be part of your family, to help Jomar succeed, to take care of your mother, to give you all the security and opportunities you deserved. The message grew longer as I poured out everything I'd been holding inside. I thought when you called me family it meant something. I thought when Jomar called me Kuya, it came from his heart. I thought when you said you loved me, you meant it the way I meant it when I said it back to you. I told her about hearing Jomar's phone call, about the conversation with Paolo at the university, about finding the messages with Nico. I don't know what was real and what was performance, I wrote. Maybe some small part of you did care about me as a person. Maybe there were moments when the affection wasn't completely manufactured, but it doesn't matter now. I can't stay in a relationship where I'm valued for my wallet instead of my heart. I told her I was leaving the next morning, that I wouldn't be coming back, that the financial support would stop immediately. I'm not angry, I wrote, though that wasn't entirely true. I'm just sad that you felt you had to lie to get what you needed, sad that I was so desperate for family that I ignored obvious signs, sad that we couldn't find a way to care about each other honestly. I ended the message with something that surprised even me. I hope Jomar finishes his education somehow. I hope your mother's diabetes stays controlled. I hope you find happiness that doesn't require deception. I hope someday you understand that love can't be bought, only given freely. I sent the message at 2 a.m, then sat in the cafe for another hour, drinking instant coffee and watching the cursor blink in the empty reply field. The message showed as delivered immediately, but it never showed as read. Hours passed, then a full day, then 2 days. The message just sat there, ignored, like I had suddenly become invisible. I tried calling Lyra, but she didn't answer. The phone would ring once, then go straight to voicemail. I tried messaging Jomar, asking if we could talk, if he could help me understand what had happened, if there was any way to salvage something real from the wreckage of what I'd thought we had. He blocked me immediately. The notification was instant and final. This user is not accepting messages from you. I even attempted to call her mother, thinking maybe she didn't know about the deception. Maybe she genuinely cared about me and could explain what had gone wrong. The number went straight to a recording in Tagalog that I couldn't understand. It was like I had been erased from their lives completely, like I had never existed at all. The family I thought I'd joined had simply closed ranks and shut me out without explanation, without argument, without any attempt to salvage our relationship or convince me to stay. No one fought for me because there was nothing to fight for. I had served my purpose as their personal ATM, and now that the money flow was ending, there was no reason to maintain the pretense. The silence was more devastating than anger would have been. Anger would have suggested I mattered enough to fight with. Silence suggested I had never mattered at all, that our entire relationship had been a business transaction disguised as love. I spent 3 more days in Tuguegarao, partly hoping someone would reach out, partly trying to process what had happened, partly just too stunned to make decisions about what to do next. I walked past their house twice, but I didn't stop. I saw Jomar once, riding his motorcycle with friends, laughing about something. He saw me too, but his expression didn't change. No guilt, no regret, no acknowledgement that we'd ever meant anything to each other. He looked right through me like I was a stranger, like the man who'd paid his tuition for 8 months had never existed. The casual indifference was worse than hatred. At least hatred would have meant I'd made an impression. On the fourth day, I packed my few belongings and took a bus to Manila, then a flight to Cebu, then another bus to a small coastal town I'd read about in a guidebook. I needed to be somewhere completely different, somewhere with no memories of family dinners and fake affection, and the sound of someone calling me Kuya while secretly mocking me to his friends. I needed to learn how to be alone again without being used. I needed to remember who I was before I became someone else's solution to their financial problems. Now I live in a small room in Vigan, Ilocos Sur. I chose this place because it's quiet and old, full of Spanish colonial houses and cobblestone streets that tourists come to photograph. People visit here to see the past, but I came here to forget it, to build something new from the pieces of who I used to be before I got confused about the difference between being needed and being loved. Every morning I walk the same route along Calle Crisologo, past the antique shops and coffee houses where elderly Filipino men play chess and discuss politics in voices that carry the weight of experience. The routine grounds me, gives structure to days that might otherwise disappear into regret and self-recrimination. I eat at the same carinderia every day, a small restaurant run by a woman about 50 with kind eyes and hands that move efficiently between pots and plates. The food is simple but good: rice, fish, vegetables prepared without pretension or performance. She started recognizing me, this solitary foreigner who orders the same thing and sits at the same table and never asks for anything special. "You always look like you're thinking," she said yesterday while serving my usual meal, her English careful but clear. "What do you think about?" I considered her question seriously. What did I think about during these long, quiet days? "I was thinking about family," I told her finally. She tilted her head, curious but not intrusive. "Do you miss them?" The question hit deeper than she probably intended. Did I miss them? Did I miss the people who had deceived me? Or did I miss the illusion they had created? Did I miss Lyra? Or did I miss the version of Lyra who had said she loved me? Did I miss Jomar? Or did I miss believing that a young man saw me as a big brother worth respecting? "I miss the idea of them," I said finally, and the honesty of that admission surprised me. She seemed to understand something in my voice, something that needed no translation. "Sometimes the family we want isn't the family we need," she said, then went back to her cooking, leaving me alone with the weight of wisdom I wasn't ready to fully absorb. "I don't send money to anyone anymore. I keep my finances simple, my life quiet, my interactions honest. I've learned to enjoy my own company again, something I'd forgotten how to do after Margaret died and before I got caught up in the desperate search for replacement love. The loneliness isn't gone, but it's different now, cleaner somehow, more honest. I'm not lonely because I'm unloved. I'm just alone, and there's a fundamental difference between those two states. Alone doesn't require deception. Alone doesn't cost money. Alone doesn't demand performance or pretense or the exhausting work of being grateful for scraps of affection. I've stopped looking for family in other people's kindness. I've stopped trying to buy love with generosity. I've stopped believing that being needed is the same thing as being wanted, that financial dependency creates emotional bonds, that desperation can be cured with charity. These seem like obvious truths now, but they weren't obvious when I was 63 and widowed and so hungry for connection that I mistook manipulation for affection. Pain teaches lessons that happiness never could. Loss clarifies priorities that comfort always obscures. Some evenings, when the tourists have gone home and Vigan settles into the peaceful darkness that only small cities know, I sit on my small balcony and think about what I learned from those months in Tuguegarao. Love shouldn't cost money. Family shouldn't require payment plans. Real affection doesn't need financial incentives to exist or continue. Trust should be earned through consistency, not purchased through generosity. These truths seem elementary now, but they weren't elementary when I was desperate to matter to someone again, when I was so afraid of being alone that I chose to be used instead. I think about Margaret sometimes, about what she would have said if she could have seen me in those final weeks with Lyra's family. She would have been gentle but honest, the way she always was when I was making mistakes she could see clearly but I was too close to recognize. "Kelvin," she would have said, "if you have to pay someone to love you, it isn't really love." She had a way of cutting through complexity to reach truth, of saying in one sentence what it took me months of pain to understand. I wish I could tell her I finally learned the lesson. I wish I could tell her I'm okay, that I'm learning to be alone without being lonely, that I'm remembering who I was before grief made me desperate. I don't hate Lyra or Jomar or any of them. Hate requires energy I no longer want to spend on people who never really knew me, who saw me only as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. They saw a lonely foreigner with money and created a story that would extract the maximum benefit with the minimum genuine emotion. In their position, facing real poverty and limited opportunities, maybe I would have done something similar. Survival makes people creative with morality. Desperation makes deception seem reasonable. I can understand their choices without forgiving them, acknowledge their circumstances without excusing their cruelty. But understanding their motives doesn't erase the pain of being deceived. It doesn't make the loneliness less real or the betrayal less sharp. It doesn't restore the trust they broke or repair the damage they caused to my ability to believe in other people's sincerity. Some wounds heal completely. Others leave scars that serve as permanent reminders of lessons learned the hard way. The scar this experience left isn't visible, but it's real. It's the knowledge that love can be counterfeited so skillfully that even intelligent people can be fooled. It's the understanding that desperation makes terrible decisions seem reasonable. It's the awareness that some prices are too high to pay, even for the illusion of belonging. I was almost part of a family, but I was only part of their plan. The difference between those two things is everything. It's the difference between being loved and being used, between belonging somewhere and being convenient to someone, between building a future together and funding someone else's future alone. I thought I was investing in relationships that would outlast my money. Instead, I was subsidizing performances that ended the moment my usefulness expired. I thought I was creating bonds that would survive economic changes. Instead, I was purchasing temporary affection that disappeared when the payments stopped. The hardest part isn't the money I lost. Money is just numbers, and I can afford to lose numbers. The hardest part is the time I lost, the emotional energy I invested, the hope I allowed myself to feel. Those can't be recovered or replaced. The months I spent believing I was building something real were months stolen from building something genuine. The love I gave them was real, even if the love they claimed to give me was manufactured. That imbalance is what hurts most deeply, the knowledge that I offered authentic emotion and received professional quality deception in return. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been smarter, more careful, less desperate for connection. If I'd asked harder questions, demanded more transparency, moved more slowly into trust. But I know the answer. I would have discovered the truth sooner, and the pain would have been the same, just compressed into a shorter timeline. The real mistake wasn't being too trusting. The real mistake was believing that love could be bought, that family could be purchased with generosity, that loneliness could be solved with money alone. Those are fundamental misunderstandings about how human connections work. Errors that led me into a situation where exploitation was inevitable. The real lesson isn't about being more suspicious or keeping better financial records or demanding receipts for every expense. The real lesson is about understanding the difference between being wanted and being needed, between inspiring affection and providing utility. People need banks and ATMs and generous relatives. People want companions and partners and family members who enrich their lives beyond their bank accounts. I confused being needed with being wanted, and that confusion made me vulnerable to people who specialized in exploiting exactly that kind of emotional desperation. Now I understand that being alone is better than being used. Solitude is better than purchased companionship. Authentic loneliness is better than manufactured connection. These aren't easy truths to accept when you're desperate for human warmth, but they're necessary truths for anyone who wants to build genuine relationships rather than financial dependencies disguised as love. I'm learning to be comfortable with solitude, to find meaning in my own thoughts and activities rather than in other people's approval or gratitude. The Corinderia owner was right. Sometimes the family we want isn't the family we need. What I wanted was instant acceptance, immediate belonging, ready-made purpose in other people's lives. What I needed was self-respect, healthy boundaries, and the courage to be alone rather than be deceived. I have those things now. They cost me more than I expected to pay, but they're mine in a way that bought love never could be. They can't be taken away by other people's changing circumstances or shifting priorities. They exist independently of anyone else's financial needs or emotional performances. I was almost part of a family, but I was only part of their plan. Now I'm part of my own plan, the architect of my own life rather than a supporting character in someone else's financial strategy. I'm learning to matter to myself before trying to matter to others. I'm discovering that self-respect is more valuable than other people's manufactured gratitude. I'm understanding that authentic solitude is preferable to purchased companionship. These lessons came at a high price, but they're lessons I needed to learn. And maybe, someday, they'll help me build something real with someone who wants me for reasons that have nothing to do with my bank account. That might be enough. That might be everything.